I have not seen a pure gross lease form in AIR yet. Pure gross means the landlord pays for everything. But in the marketplace, you are more accustomed to seeing modified gross. Modified gross is just between net and gross, which means that the tenant is paying for certain expenses and the landlord is paying for certain expenses. Last week, we went over a net lease. Now that one appears to me to be a pure lease, pure net lease. Since we don't have a pure gross, we'll just use a modified gross. Okay, which is commonly what's happening in the marketplace anyway. You don't use pure gross anymore, unless it's a full service small office where everything is paid for by the landlord. In that case, you don't have a air form that you can use. Now it says here, do not use this form for multi-tenant buildings because this is actually a form for single tenant. We went over this part already. So you fill out the date for reference only, okay? And that's the date. And then you fill out the landlord's name. And then you fill out the tenant's name. And then you fill out the property address. And the county. And the state. I guess you won't let me type out the whole name, so let's see what's available. I only have CA, so CA, okay, State of California. And you put a description of the project, okay, and it might be a usually a gross lease only applies to office buildings. You don't usually see gross lease in warehouses. If anything, you're more likely to see net lease in warehouses. Let's say, for example, 3,000 square feet. Standalone. This building, whatever the description is. This part here on the term, I think we went over that the last time. It's actually the same thing. There's a lot of similarities between the single tenant gross lease and single tenant net lease. This is like a review to you. Now, let's say, for example, we're doing a 5-year lease, right? 5 years and 0 months. And commencing on today's date, okay, and ending 2022. And then the month is April. No, actually it's May. So it ends on May 14, 2022, because I want it to be a 5-year lease. And the base rent, let's say it's 10,000. Assuming it's this is a 3,000 square feet office, and assuming is $3 something per square foot, so it's close to $10,000. a month. Okay. Now this is the amount of money that is paid upon execution. Is a check that the tenant have to prepare for the landlord in order to get the key. That is the base rent and other monies paid upon execution. Okay. So we have the base rent. Now the base rent, it could be prorated because, we're starting on May 15th. So it's actually prorated for half a month, right? And then, the next due date for the rent payment will be June 1st. But if you want to collect it upfront for June, then it will be $15,000 as opposed to, now the base rent is actually $10,000. $10,000. Sorry, I had the wrong number here, right? So base rent is $10,000, but that's from May 15 to June 15. But if I want to have the rent be due on the first of each month, I may have to make some adjustment here. Do I want to collect $5,000 and make the initial payment from May 15 to May 31st, or do I want to collect $15,000? Let's say I want to collect $15,000, okay, because it's from May 15 to June 30th. That will cover a month and a half. Okay, so it's $15,000. Security deposit, that really, it's all negotiable. For commercial leases, sometimes we see 6 months of security deposit. So that's $60,000 right there. Okay, for security deposit. Association dues, assuming there is no association to be paid. So the total amount that is due by the tenant, assuming it will be $15,000 plus $60,000. So that is $75,000. That will be what is due upon signing of the lease agreement. Okay. Agreed use, just say office, general office. Okay. Insuring party. Now the lessor, who is the landlord, is the insuring party. That's what a modified gross is. On a modified gross, the standard form says the landlord pays for the insurance. So, but the landlord always only pays the base premium. If there's any resulting increase in the premium that the landlord pays as a result of the activities of the tenant, which causes the premium to go up, then usually the lease makes the tenant pay for the increment. So the landlord is only responsible for the base premium. Let's say the base premium is $2,000. Okay. And here we got, let's say we represent the lessor. Okay. We put down Centermac Realty Inc. And we don't know who the lessee's broker yet. And then on the commission, broker, payments to broker, you actually have a choice of disclosing that payment. Sometimes you don't want the tenant to know how much you're getting for the commission. So that will be a separate agreement between the brokers and the landlord. And then usually if you put your property on the LoopNet, we usually disclose the commission split on LoopNet So the tenant's agent knows how much he's getting for the commission. Just to give you an idea, you know, there are some companies that that actually will make you send an invoice to the landlord if you're the tenant's agent. And there are some agents who are listing agents of bigger company. You ask them to sign an agreement with your commission agreement. They are very reluctant to, for whatever reason. Sometimes they'll just tell you, just trust me. I usually don't trust them. I just send an email and say, confirm this is the commission I'm getting. Then I feel better. Okay. So make sure you have some kind of email confirmation for your commission if you represent the tenant. Because they represent the landlord, they already have the listing agreement with the landlord. So they have a document already, and we don't. So my best proof is actually my email with the agent if he doesn't want to sign anything with me. And of course, you have the LoopNet commission split to back you up, okay, in case there's a dispute later on. So usually we don't like the tenant to know how much we're getting, okay. Actually, it gives you another option. It says parentheses, or if there's no such agreement, the sum of, which is like a flat fee commission, or a percentage of the base rent. Now, your commission is based on the base rent. So anything in excess of the base rent will not be used to compute your commission. Base rent is just the base rent. It doesn't include anything else. So in this case, our base rent is what? $10,000 per month. Now, if it's a 5-year lease, it's 10,000 times 12 times 5, right? That will be the total base rent because it's a 5-year lease, right? Now, if you do not negotiate to get paid your commission for the option years, you don't get paid your commission should the tenant decide to exercise the option for the option. So you probably should pay attention to whether or not you want to negotiate to be paid a commission should the tenant decide to exercise the option. Sometimes you may have a tenant who negotiates to have a 5-year lease plus 2 5-year options. Now, if you want to be paid your commission for each of the option period, that should be in writing though. If it's not in writing, you do not get paid your commission. Okay. On the guarantor, you just go ahead and put down who the guarantor is. Okay. Let's say the guarantor is Kim Smith. Okay, so Kim Smith is the guarantor. And then if they have a guarantor, there is a separate form for guarantee agreement. Okay, don't forget that standard form. And this is the same as the net lease. You got the attachment. If you have an addendum, I told you before, and if you're adding paragraphs to the addendum, you always start with a number that follows the last paragraph number. Whatever the last paragraph number is, if it's 50, then you come in here, you start with paragraph 51, and then put down the last paragraph number, whatever number you end up with on your addendum. I don't like to repeat paragraph numbers. Every paragraph number should be unique in the entire agreement. Okay? If you have a plot plan, it's always good to include the plot plan. Okay? And in fact, you should always ask for the plot plan from the landlord. Okay? Include that. They may not have rules and regulations. If there isn't any, you don't have to check it. And oftentimes, they will have like a tenant improvement. All the tenant improvement work will come under work letter. Any tenant improvement that you agree to do for the tenant will be set forth in the work letter. We talked about square footage does not bind the landlord. Whatever square footage that the landlord puts in here does not bind him. If he's wrong on the square footage, the tenant does not get to adjust the rent, nor can the landlord ask for adjustment in rent if the landlord is on the shorter end of the stick. So basically, whatever rent that is negotiated, that is fixed, regardless of whether or not in the future it is discovered that the square footage that was stated in the lease was wrong. Okay? And condition, usually it says broom clean and debris free. Okay? Room clean and debris free. And also, usually, the electricals, heating, sprinkler, plumbing, lighting, ventilation and AC, and loading doors, sump pumps, those are all the responsibilities of the landlord upon delivery of the premises. And how much time does the tenant have as far as the warranty given by the lessor? Only 6 months. You see here, 6 months for the HVAC, I apologize. It is 6 months for the HVAC and only 30 days for the remaining systems and other elements of the building. So if you're the tenant, if you do not check it, and if it's discovered after the period has expired, you may be stuck with the repair costs. So certainly, it behooves the tenant to also do the tenant's own inspection. If the tenant wants to make sure that, in fact, everything is okay. Remember, the warranty period is really short. It's only 30 days. All right. Now, as far as compliance goes, let's talk a little bit about compliance. The landlord warrants, which means that he guarantees that the improvements that were made to the property on the day of delivery of the premises comply with building codes, applicable laws, covenants, or restrictions of record, regulations, and ordinances that were in effect at the time that each improvement or portion thereof was constructed. All that means is, if in the future the city changed the ordinance, the landlord will not be obligated to comply with the city's new ordinance. Rather, it will be the tenant's responsibility to comply with the new ordinance. And that is very important. That is a big difference between commercial and residential lease. What you see is what you get. And what you get you will have to make changes to it to comply with your own use. Landlord is not responsible for it unless you negotiate for it. But most landlords will not negotiate with you on making changes. Basically, they just say, my systems are good. I warrant the compliance with the code, but only based on the code that existed at the time I made the improvements. Now, if you made the improvements like 6 or 7 years ago, at that time, the code might be different than the codes now. So whatever warranties that he gives you, he only warrants that it complies with the codes that were in effect at the time he made the improvement. So you want to know when he made the improvement. Actually, better yet, if you represent the tenant, you just have somebody do the inspection and tell you if there's anything that was constructed a long time ago that might not be in compliance with the codes as they exist today. So if you're the tenant, you're stuck with what you get. Now, you may have recourse against the landlord if whatever improvements that he made wasn't even in compliance with the code that existed 6 or 7 years ago. That's about the only recourse you have. If he has been in compliance at the time they were built, it's really the tenant's duty to find out. Now, what if the tenant finds out during the inspection prior to signing the lease? The tenant can actually negotiate. We discovered that certain things were not constructed in accordance with the code. Can we negotiate to have this thing fixed before we sign the lease? Sure, you can talk about that. They may, that's why if you discover it early, it's easier for them to do things for you because they wanted you to sign the lease. But if you discover after you move in, the window is very, very short. You might miss the window. Okay? All right. 2.5 talks about lessee as prior owner and occupant. What that means is, now let's say, for example, you are a buyer. You are interested in the listing by a seller who is willing to stay on as a tenant to you after you close escrow. Now, if this seller later becomes your tenant, then whatever warranties made by the lessor in paragraph 2 shall be of no force effect, because this guy was already there. He was the previous owner, so we don't really give him any kind of warranties. Okay, so that's the exception there. Let's talk a little bit about early possession. It's important to know what the requirements are for early possession and what are the standard practice for early possession. Early possession means the guy moves in, but the base rent doesn't start until a later time. So during this period of early possession, he pays no base rent. But does that mean that he doesn't pay anything? Not necessarily. If you look at the provision for early possession, it says any provision herein granting lessee early possession of the premises is subject to and conditioned upon the premises being available for such possession prior to the commencement date. Any grant of early possession only conveys a non-exclusive right to occupy the premises. So really, early possession only gave the tenant a non-exclusive possession, not exclusive possession. Tenant only gets exclusive possession upon the first day that he pays rent. Okay? So you might want to explain to your tenant that if he takes early possession, during this early possession period, he doesn't get exclusive possession. So, landlord might be going in and out. Okay? And landlord has the right to do that. If the lessee totally or partially occupies the premises prior to the commencement date, the obligation to pay base rent shall be abated for the period of such early possession. Let's see here. It says here, if tenant totally or partially occupies the premises prior to commencement date, the obligation to pay base rent shall be abated for the period of such early possession. What that means is, let's say, for example, you give the tenant early possession. Usually you give him 100% possession. Now, let's say, for example, the landlord is not able to give 100% possession. The landlord is only able to give 50% of the premises for early possession. Because the tenant did not have 100%, there might be some rent abatement coming from the landlord to the tenant, such that his first pass rent might be reduced because the tenant did not get the 100% early possession. That's in the standard provision. All other terms of this lease, including but not limited to the obligations to pay real property taxes and insurance premiums and to maintain the premises, shall be in effect during such period. That's what I was saying. When you take early possession, it doesn't mean you pay zero. It only means you do not pay the base rent. But if you have other financial obligations, those financial obligations still apply during the early possession period. Any such early possession shall not affect the expiration date. Okay, so even if the tenant gets early possession, the expiration remains unchanged. Delay in possession, we've talked about it the last time, but I'll briefly review it with you. If the possession is delayed for longer than 120 days, then the lease automatically is terminated. If the early possession is delayed by more than 60 days, then the tenant shall have the right to cancel the lease upon giving 10 days of written notice to the landlord. So tenant doesn't have to wait a long time and will be able to cancel the lease and look for another property if the possession is delayed for too long. And delay in possession by the landlord does not give the tenant the right to sue the landlord. No right to sue the landlord. Tenant compliance. All right, let's talk about it. Lessor shall not be required to deliver possession of the premises to lessee until lessee complies with his obligation to provide evidence of insurance. Pending delivery of such evidence, lessee shall be required to perform all of his obligations under this lease from and after the start date, including the payment of rent. What that means is, if the lease requires evidence of insurance, in this case it does, and come commencement date, and tenant is already obligated to pay rent on commencement date, but unfortunately tenant still has not provided proof of insurance to the landlord. Landlord has the right to prevent a tenant from taking possession if tenant does not provide proof of insurance to the landlord. In this case, tenant has no possession. However, the obligation to pay rent starts. Okay, so you could have a situation where the tenant actually pays rent without the ability to take possession because he did not provide proof of insurance to the landlord. Rent define all monetary obligations of lessee to lessor under the terms of this lease are deemed to be rent. Any financial obligation, okay, monetary obligations are all rent. We got the base rent. We don't have association fees. If we have association fees are considered to be rent. So if the tenant doesn't pay association fees, landlord can serve them with a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit because association fees are considered to be rent. We talked about security deposit. On a residential lease, the time that the landlord has to refund the security deposit upon termination of the lease is 21 days. On a commercial lease, it can be longer. According to this form, I think it is 90 days. Look at the screen, it's 90 days over here. Okay, it's much longer. As far as the use goes, even though it says it's for office use, however, sometimes you may modify the use provided you get consent from the landlord, and landlord cannot unreasonably withhold consent if it's something that does not materially change the current use. If it's an office use, you can't change it to a supermarket, for example. That will be a material change, right? So it will be fairly close to the current use. We're not going to do the environmental issue, so we'll skip it this time. We'll save the environmental issue for the future. So we're going to skip all the way to maintenance obligation. Now, even though it's a gross lease, I said it's a modified gross, which means that tenant may have some maintenance obligation. What are tenants' maintenance obligations? It says here, tenant shall, lessee shall at lessee's sole expense keep the premises, utility installation, and alterations in good order, condition, and repair. See, normally on a gross lease, landlord takes care of all of this. But on a modified gross, tenant actually tenant will take care of certain things like, maintain the premises in good repairs and take care of the utility installations. These are the fire sprinklers, the cable, and so forth. Alterations, whatever alteration the tenant makes, the tenant's supposed to keep it in good repair. Landlord's obligation mainly have to do with the building. And it says here, a tenant in keeping the premises in good order, condition, repair shall exercise and perform good maintenance practices. So these are tenants' maintenance obligation. Tenant shall also keep the exterior appearance of the building in a first-class condition. So if you see graffiti on the wall, you're supposed to remove the graffiti. It is not the landlord's responsibility. So even on a gross lease, if some bad kid in the neighborhood sprays graffiti on the wall, you don't go to the landlord and ask him to remove the graffiti. You're the tenant, you remove the graffiti. Okay? Service contract, they actually require the tenant to maintain service contracts for the facility. If the tenant does not have a service contract, the landlord can take over and charge a tenant a 15% surcharge on the cost to the landlord to carry out the tenant's obligation. Replacement, let's say, for example, you have a roof that is very, very old at the time you take over the lease, and you could not negotiate to have the landlord replace the roof. In this case, you would, according to the terms of the contract, and you have a really, really bad leak to the roof. Now, usually, things such as roof, right, on a gross lease, I believe on a gross lease, the roof is the responsibility. Let's check it out here. It says here, lessor's obligation. Now, what's the lessor's obligation? It's intended by the parties thereto that lessors have no obligation in any manner whatsoever to repair and maintain the premises or the equipment therein, all of which obligations are intended to be that of the lessee, except for the surface and structural elements of the roof. So if the roof leaks, it is the responsibility of the landlord and not the, but they talk about the structural elements now. So mainly just the structural elements of the roof, okay? I would think that in this case, it is the landlord's responsibility to fix the roof if the roof leaks. Now, if the roof needs to be replaced because it's not fixable, the formula to use to pay for the roof on the, actually, let's look at this one. I skipped this one, I apologize. Now, let's say subject to lessees, let's see here. If an item described in 7.1b cannot be repaired other than at the cost which is in excess of 50% of the cost of replacing such item, then such item shall be replaced by lessor. What this means is, now if you go back to 7.1b, 7.1b talks about service contract. So basically, the service contract, which is paid for by the lessee, will make sure that things are in good repairs. However, sometimes you may encounter things that cannot be repaired. Now, in that case, the tenant does not pay for the replacement. Rather, it is the landlord that pays for the replacement under D, but the cost would have to be in excess of the 50% of the cost of replacing. So if the certain item is so costly to repair, and the tenant goes to the landlord and say the cost to repair is actually greater than 50% of the replacement cost. If that's the case, I want the landlord to pay for it. And according to this paragraph, the landlord will pay for it in that situation. Even if the landlord pays for that, it doesn't mean that the cost will not be passed along to the tenant. The cost will actually be passed along to the tenant, because if you read further, it says, then such item shall be replaced by the lessor, and the cost thereof shall be prorated between the parties, and lessee shall only be obligated to pay each month during the remainder of the terms of its lease on the date on which the base rent is due, an amount equal to the product of multiplying the cost of such replacement by a fraction, the numerator of which is 1 and the denominator of which is 144, i.e. 1 and 144th of the cost per month. Okay, so actually the tenant actually will get the pass along cost, even though the landlord comes up with the upfront money to do the fixing, but it's actually passed to the tenant in the future. Lessor's obligation, that's the one we're interested in. Lessor shall have no obligation to repair and maintain the premises, okay, except the surface and structural elements of the roof, foundations and bearing walls, the repair of which shall be the responsibility of lessor. As you can see, now you see why this is modified gross and not gross. Because the landlord is only responsible for making certain major repairs like the roof, the foundation, and the bearing walls. Everything else seems to be the responsibility of the tenant. The repair which shall be the responsibility of lessor upon receipt of written notice that such a repair is necessary. It is intention of the parties that the terms of this lease govern respective obligations of the parties to maintenance and repair of the premises, and they expressly waive the benefit of any statute. Okay, so really on a modified gross, landlord takes care of all the structural repairs, tenant takes care of all the non-structural repairs, period. That's a modified gross. Utility installation, usually those are the tenant's responsibility to make repairs. Okay, we'll skip that. And there are a few things we are skipping because we have other similar forms that we will cover, and when we talk about those forms, I will come back and cover them, and then I'll omit the ones I've already covered. We're not going to be able to finish everything in 1 hour. Obviously, it's a very complicated form. Okay, I want to highlight a few things before I leave you guys. Payment of premium increases, I told you earlier. If due to tenant's activities, the insurance cost actually increases, then the tenant will pay the difference between the base premium and the new insurance cost. And the tenant will carry their own insurance. Usually it's $1 million and $2 million. Okay. And the landlord will carry their respective insurance. Property insurance. Landlord take care of that. See, the one that the tenant takes care of is just the liability now. See, the commercial general liability. Tenant does not take care of the property insurance. The landlord does. It says here insuring party, which means that it's the landlord. Okay, so they take care of the insurance. Rental value. That pertains to the landlord. Business interruption insurance, that's usually carried by the tenant. Okay, and then tenant will carry their own workers' comp. We'll skip this for next time. These are all standard provisions. Okay, here's the important one. Real property taxes. Payment, lessor pay the real property taxes. So on a modified gross, the landlord actually pays the property taxes, not the tenant. However, that lessee shall pay to lessor the amount, if any, by which the real property taxes applicable to the premise increase over the fiscal year during which the commencement date occurs. What does that mean? Payment of any such tax increase shall be made by lessee to lessor within 30 days, which means that, you know, every year our property tax goes up by 2%, right? So the first year, 100% will be paid by the landlord. Second year, the tenant winds up paying the increase now, and then the landlord still continue to pay the property tax amount for the base year. So your tenant client may have to pay for property tax, even if it sounds like a gross lease, because it is a modified gross. So it's important for you to educate your tenant so they are not surprised by it, right? It says here very clearly though, however, that lessee shall pay to lessor the amount, if any, by which real property taxes applicable to the premises increase over the fiscal tax year during which the commencement date occurs is called the tax increase. Okay? Personal property taxes are usually the responsibility of the tenant, so we don't even need to discuss that. Utilities and services, the tenant will pay for it. Okay? Assigning and subletting is pretty standard. We'll cover it the next time. Yeah, the rest are standard provision. We'll cover the next time. Let's talk about brokerage fees, since you guys are so interested in brokerage fees. Additional commission. In addition to the payments owed pursuant to paragraph 1.9 above, lessors agree that if lessee exercises any option, it's covered here, David. You might be safe. Okay. B, if lessee or anyone affiliated with the lessee acquires any rights to the premises or any other premises owned by lessor and located within the same project, if any, within which the premises is located. C, if lessee remains in possession of the premises with the consent of the lessor after expiration of this lease. Or D, if base rent is increased, whether by agreement or by operation of an escalation clause herein, then lessor shall pay brokers a fee in accordance with the fee schedule of the brokers in effect at the time the lease was executed. So you're already protected by default anyway. Unless you delete this one, you should be able to get paid your commission for the option years though. Not only for the option years, you should be able to pay your commission based on any adjustment in the rent that the two of them agree on. Okay. Now, by that I mean, you know, sometimes the tenant may voluntarily agree to allow the landlord to charge a higher rent, and you know, any increase in the rent, you're entitled to it to get paid your commission. So really, now when you calculate your commission, now what if you calculate a commission based on an annual inflation increase of 3% in the rent? That 3% actually gets computed in your commission calculation, right? So when you calculate your commission, make sure you increase, you put in all the annual increases and not leave those increase out, okay? Assumption of obligation. Okay, this is always good. It actually protects the agent. It's called the assumption of obligations. Any buyer or transferee of lessor's interest in it shall be deemed to have assumed lessor's obligation. Now let's say, for example, the landlord decides to sell the property, and now you have a new owner. That new owner is bound to pay you commission. So if you have a change of ownership, your commission is still pretty safe with the new owner. Okay, don't forget. Representations and indemnities of broker relationships. So this one actually protects it. So all of these are actually protective of the agent. We'll talk about estoppel certificate the next time. Talk about this the next time. We have other standard leases we need to discuss, and they have very similar, if not the same provision. So we'll have an opportunity to talk about the rest of these important provisions. Okay, because we're talking about gross lease today, I want to just highlight a few things that pertain to gross lease only. I talked about option personal to original lessee the last time. Talked about those already. I think I talked about ADA the last time. So we're done talking about gross lease form. Now, whatever you learned from your previous class on triple net lease or net lease, many of the things that I talked about are also applicable in a gross lease. Okay, so as you can see, in conclusion, the main differences between a modified gross and a net lease on an AIR form is just that the landlord pays for real property tax on a gross lease, whereas the tenant pays for the property tax on a net lease. Everything else, other than that, they're very, very similar. The modified gross are, actually, if you look at the spectrum between the net lease and the gross lease, the modified gross is actually very close to triple net. There are only a few things that the landlord actually picks up. The rest of it is pretty much the tenants. Okay. All right. That concludes our meeting, and thank you all for coming.